Welcome to the National Arts Club, NAC at Home program produced by the National Arts Club. My name is Nina Urban, co-chair of the club's film committee. It is very nice to see you all here tonight, or today, this afternoon. Yes. So for those of you who are not familiar with the National Arts Club, we are a 501c3 nonprofit organization based in New York City with a mission to stimulate, foster, and promote public interest in the arts. Annually, the club offers more than 150 free programs to the public, including exhibitions, theatrical and musical performances, lectures, and readings. For more information about the National Arts Club, you can visit us at nationalartsclub.org or find us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube. I would like to thank the staff at the National Arts Club for making this program possible today, as well as the film committee for its support. Today, it is our pleasure to welcome narrative expert Mark Voelpel. Mark is an associate professor in the film department at Brooklyn College and founding faculty at the Fairstein Graduate School of Cinema. Mark has worked in a wide variety of capacities in the film, television, and media industries. As a director and studio head, Mark has led projects for clients such as Nike, Samsung, Google, General Motors, and Peloton, and has won major advertising industry awards from Clio's to the Cannes Grand Prix. He's also the director of 3 award-winning narrative films, award-winning feature documentary, One Nation Under God, and the short, The Strange Case of Balthasar Hippolyte, which was a finalist for Best Short for the 1993 Academy Awards. Following the presentation will be a question and answer session, so please feel free to use the Q&A function here on Zoom for any questions you might have. Without further ado, let me turn it over to Mark Voelpel. Please enjoy the program.
Hi there. So thanks for joining me today. What I want to talk about today is the title is The Art of Cinematic Storytelling. And I guess I have a subtitle here saying The Secrets to Becoming a Storyteller. So, we have about 45 minutes or so, and then we're going to have a Q&A session. I'm looking forward to your questions. Feel free to think them up, write them down, but I'm looking forward to those. But what I really want to do is, you can literally spend your life studying the craft of storytelling. And I encourage you to do that, with as much as you would like to. But what I would like to do today is kind of give you a glimpse, show you a little bit of the craft of storytelling, introduce it to you as a concept, maybe dispel a few myths, clarify some things, but anyway, sort of get you started, to get you to think about this, that maybe I can stimulate in you an interest in storytelling to develop, and empower yourself with stories, with stories, but specifically with the ability to tell and craft and design compelling, engaging stories for whatever reasons you might have to do that, of which there are likely many. I do want to point out in my introduction that the 2 films that were mentioned, I was the director of photography on those 2 films. I did not direct them, but I have been teaching storytelling specifically and screenwriting and various aspects of filmmaking for about 20 years. And I've been applying all those principles in my work as a filmmaker, of which most of the stuff that has gotten very broad audiences, large audiences, has been advertising. So yeah, let's get started. Oops. All right. So here's a concept. Storytelling is a craft. It's a craft that can be learned, developed, but it is a craft. Most things that people do and that people learn how to do and that people are good at, when they say it's a craft, nobody argues with them. Nobody debates the subject. If I say I'm a cinematographer or a writer or an engineer, and I say I had to learn this craft, but there is this strange thing about storytelling that people think everyone's a storyteller. And that everybody can be a storyteller. Everybody has stories. But storytelling is still a craft. And this idea that with all these other crafts that we have, we don't debate, oh, well, it's a craft, and it's a craft that can be practiced professionally. It's something that can be learned. But there's this thing about stories, that stories are considered almost sacred by a lot of people, and why not? But and that they should, come from the heart and soul, and that they should be, from pure inspiration. And that's a great thing. Some stories do come from the heart and soul, and some of them are pure inspiration. But when we get down to, trying to craft compelling and engaging stories. It is a craft. And so today I want to dig into that. I want to illuminate that and get into some of the basic elements of the craft of storytelling. So let's start with this. Every story has specific components that make it a story. And let's consider those components. But without those specific components, it's not a story. So I just want to go through some very basic, fundamental components and elements of stories. And that if you don't have these in the thing that you think is a story, honestly, it's not a story. Right? Sometimes when I'm talking about storytelling, I like to think about architecture and construction and buildings. If I said I'm an architect and I pointed to a pile of rubble, and I said that's a building, you would be like, no, it's not. It's a pile of rubble. And I could say, no, but I'm going to make it into a building. And it's great, but it's not a building yet. There's certain qualities that buildings have. And one is a pile of rubble does not have the qualities of a building. We can talk about music or a specific genre of music like rock and roll. And if I said, okay, I'm gonna have a rock and roll band perform for you. And if I had a string quartet play a Mozart string quartet, I said that was rock and roll, you'd say, no, it's not. And it doesn't matter what I would say. We could have an interesting conversation about the relationship between rock and roll and a string quartet, but still, and I could also, somebody could pick up a musical instrument for the very first time in their life, and they could really express themselves with it as fully and as they possibly could, and then they could say that was a rock song, and most people would say no, it was not a rock song. But with stories, we have this concept that everything's a story. Everything's a story. Here's my logo, it's a story. Okay, here's my roller coaster ride, it's a story. Or here's my tagline, or here's anything can be a story, but that's not true. And if we're going to learn the craft of storytelling, we have to understand what a story is and what a story isn't. So here's another thing about stories that makes this whole thing a little bit challenging to address, which is stories are pervasive. We're surrounded by stories. Stories are everywhere. And I mean, everything, so much of what you do in a day is to participate and consume stories. But here's the thing, the air we breathe is pervasive. So here's just a little, I don't know, this little trivia thing. But we say, okay, well, we spend all our life breathing air. Air is not only pervasive, it's essential. We can't survive without it. And yet, how many people know what the number one element of air is, the number one gas of air is? I'm sure that a certain portion of you do, but probably not the majority. It's nitrogen, okay? What's second? 21% of air is what? Oxygen. Okay, what is number 3? 0.9%. Probably nobody, well, I'm sure there's somebody there, and you should be very proud of yourself if you know this, and you should probably get yourself on Who Wants to Be a Millionaire or something. But number 3 is argon. But the point here that I'm trying to make is not that you need to study chemistry, but that just because something's pervasive, it doesn't mean you know anything about it. You don't have to think about it. It's pervasive. Air is everywhere. You don't have to think about it. Stories are pervasive. And we can say that, we are all expert consumers of stories. I think that we can safely say that. If one of you can say, no, I'm not an expert consumer of stories, I've shielded myself from stories for several years, that'd be very impressive. I would be curious to know how you would have pulled that off. But anyway, if there is anything that unites everyone in the United States of America, I would say it is our communal expertise at consuming stories. But there's this thing, which is because you can consume something does not mean you can create it, right? Being an expert consumer of stories does not make you an expert storyteller, any more than drinking wine makes you a vintner. Is that what somebody, I think that's what somebody that makes wine is called. But enjoying drinking wine or whiskey does not make you able to make whiskey or wine. Living your life in buildings does not make you able to build or design a building. Listening to Beethoven symphonies, no matter how many times you listen to them, does not put you in a position where you can say, oh, I have 2 weeks of vacation coming up. Why don't I get myself, some notation paper and bang out a Beethoven symphony? It's not going to happen, right? Consuming something does not make you an expert at creating it. And the same thing is true of stories. So we live in this world where, because stories are pervasive and everybody is an expert consumer of stories, we have this thing where people literally are kind of in denial that there is a craft of storytelling a lot of the time. But we know that the people who can consistently craft and create compelling, engaging stories, they do pretty well a lot of the time, and at various things, like making movies or becoming the president of the United States in some cases, or whatever. So yeah, we're coming back to storytelling as a craft. So let's dig into some aspects of the craft of storytelling. So now you understand my point of view. Storytelling is a craft. It can be learned. It can be taught. It can be improved. All those things. But to just say no, I'm going to go off on a tangent here and say one thing. Like many things, like music, if you just pick up a guitar today and you practice the guitar for 2 to 10 hours every day for the rest of your life, you will learn how to play the guitar. You don't have to take lessons. You don't have to watch YouTube tutorials. You can just do something over and over and over and over again all the time, and you'll learn how to. And you can do that with stories. If you're a sketch creator and you write and perform sketches every single day for the rest of your life, you will learn storytelling. You don't necessarily have to study it. You can learn it that way, and it becomes intuitive and all those things. So that is one way to learn it. For those of you that have time and the ability to tell stories to an audience every single day for the rest of your life, you can turn off this presentation right now. You don't need it. That's your path to learning storytelling. For those of you that don't have that time and energy, maybe you want to keep watching. So what is a story? What are these fundamental components of a story that make it a story, that make a story a story? Well, I'm going to give you like this, a broad framework right now. And by the time I'm done, I think most of you will have learned something significant. And, you can decide what this makes you think. Does it make you think, oh, this is too complicated, I'm not interested in this? Or does it make you think, oh, this seems really fascinating? Is this the beginning of a sequence of events where you continue to refine and develop your approach to storytelling? And again, let me now, when we talked about pervasiveness of storytelling, a job interview is essentially you delivering a narrative, a story to the person who's interviewing you and considering to hire you for a job. I would say when you boil down a job interview, that is a lot of what it is. Okay. And the person that's interviewing you wants you to give them a coherent narrative, because when they go to their boss or their boss's boss or whoever they have to go to get the okay to hire you, they want to have a coherent narrative that makes sense. The conclusion of your narrative to get a job it would be effective is when you told your story that the resolution and climax of that story was that you would finally achieve your fullness of self because they would hire you in this ideal position that you're about to get, hopefully. But one of the reasons to learn the craft of storytelling is to apply it in things like job interviews, and when you're trying to close a deal, when you're trying to make a friend, when you're trying to seduce someone. It's like storytelling and narratives are essential to just communication between human beings, right? And the other things about stories are that stories are probably the best way to communicate complex, rich, resonating ideas from one person to another. And a story can be amplified through media, right? So it doesn't have to be one-on-one. It can be like I'm right now speaking to quite a few people here. So there's a lot of reasons why you would be interested in becoming a better storyteller that are not writing screenplays or making movies, that are just getting things done in your normal interpersonal life that you would want to. So let's find out, what are some of these fundamental components of story that make a story a story? Well, here's where I'm going to start. You can start anywhere. I like to start here. A story must have a protagonist. It's kind of obvious. It's pretty clear. It's hard to debate this one. And just to be clear, a story can have as many protagonists as you want. You literally could make a story where every single human on planet Earth is a co-protagonist. You could do that. It's more challenging than having just one protagonist, I think, but you got to have at least one protagonist. So you got to have a protagonist. Now, what else about this protagonist do we want to take into consideration to make a story a story? Okay, the protagonist must have a strong, identifiable desire. This is required. If your protagonist or your main character does not have a strong, identifiable desire, it's not a story. Now, I do want to, I guess, give a qualifier for all these things, that you can have things that take some thought to figure out what the answer to these questions are. Okay. but let's just stay focused here on a protagonist must have a strong identifiable desire. This word desire, there's a couple synonyms that are used very often. Want, what does the protagonist want? What is the protagonist's objective? These are, for purposes of story structure, these three words are relatively synonyms. You can use them all, those three, whenever you want. I would say need is not a synonym. Need is something else. We're not going to talk about that today. Need often involves a subconscious psychology. We often talk about want versus need, but like I said, we don't have time to really get into need today. But desire, want, objective. Okay, so now we got a protagonist. They have a strong identifiable desire. They have a strong identifiable desire, or want, or objective if you prefer. Now they must actively pursue this strong desire. This is required for your story. Your story must have a protagonist that actively pursues their desire. So your protagonist must be active. So this is important. And this is the first thing maybe I've touched upon. I don't think I've created too much controversy so far, but this thing, active protagonist, there's some people are like, wait a minute, I've been working for a long time on a story of a completely passive protagonist. Sorry, I'm sorry to be the bearer of bad news. It's really not a story if your protagonist does not actively pursue what they want. So I just want to kind of emphasize this for a moment here. Yeah, we need to have an active protagonist. Okay, so your protagonist must be active. I think we've established that now. Now, I do have good news. Now, we can examine for a second. We could take into consideration, why are so many inexperienced storytellers attached to having passive protagonists? People who don't want to leave the house, or people who can't decide what they want, people that are stuck or paralyzed, people that don't know what they want, or they know what they want and they don't pursue it. Well, you know, we have a word for you know, a lot of people who don't know what they want, and a lot of people who think they know what they want but don't actively pursue what they say they want. And I would say that word, or those two words, would be real life. So yes, in real life, we struggle against our passivity. We struggle against we have a struggle to be decisive and clear. And therefore we would say, well, why can't I explore this fascination I have with passivity in my story? Well, you absolutely can explore it, but you need to explore it with a protagonist who is active. Now, because of this nature of many human beings being passive, many stories have protagonists who are by nature passive. But guess what? The story moves them into action. Happens all the time. And it's a very appealing thing when you watch a TV pilot. Many TV pilots are about, I'm just looking at my compositing here. Many TV pilots are about a passive character who suddenly is thrown into action. And the thing that throws them into action, we're not going to talk about this too much, is the inciting incident. So your protagonist can be as passive as you want them to be until the inciting incident. Sadly, the inciting incident must occur early in the story, quite early. But you could try to drag it out for a while. But yeah, and there's no harm. You can, and absolutely, it's a great story. You can have like I said, you can have a protagonist who is naturally passive, wants to be passive, but the events, have conspired against them and forced them to become active. So how active? Okay, so I got 4 movies. I'm gonna unveil them each one at a time. I have not chosen these 4 movies. I've not chosen them because they're the greatest films ever made. I've not chosen them because they represent a spectrum, or because I've chosen them because the odds are high that you've seen them. So I'm trying to illustrate these points as clearly as I can. And in order to do that, I've tried to choose some movies that I think you might have seen, if you like cinema, or even if you don't, you might have been forced to watch these movies. But anyway, Jaws. Okay, so Martin Brody, played by Roy Scheider. He's a protagonist of Jaws. He's arguably the protagonist, though Matt Hooper, played by Richard Dreyfuss, he's a co-protagonist, and there's others. But Martin Brody, he's the main protagonist, right? What does he want? He wants to save the citizens of his town from being killed by a great white shark. He actively pursues that. Luke Skywalker, I think you've probably heard of him, the character, and he's going to fight the power, is what he's going to do. That's actively. He's going to very actively fight the power, the evil empire. This is Marion Crane from Psycho, and she is the protagonist of what I would call the first act. We're not going to talk about acts today, but stories, are divided into acts, and there's a myth out there that all stories have 3 acts. It's not true. Shakespeare did not get that memo. He wrote 37 plays. All 37 plays have 5 acts. So whoever decided all stories have 3 acts, I don't know why they didn't get that memo over to Shakespeare, but he missed that one. But anyway, Act 1 in Psycho is notable because the protagonist, Marion Crane, meets her demise in a rather famous sequence. So that means there's a new protagonist, becomes the new protagonist, which is the very nice guy, Norman Bates. And so he just, he has an objective that he acted. Well, wait, let's talk about Marion Crane's. Her active pursuit of her desire is she wants to be with the man she loves. And he has already told her in the first scene that they can't get married and live together until he has enough money to do everything right and set it up. And then she falls into like, what is it, $60,000 in cash or so. And she decides she's just going to take it because she wants to be with the man she loves. And she's actively doing that. And then Norman Bates actively wants to protect his mother. He ends up enabling her, but he's also trying to actively pursue to persuade his mother to love him. Chris Washington, the protagonist of Get Out, he wants to meet his girlfriend's family, and eventually he has to fight for his survival. He actively pursues those things. All right, so the protagonist knows what they want, and the protagonist pursues what they want. And they do anything and everything to get what they want. So this is it's a lot, right? They know what they want. They're going to actively pursue. They're going to do everything they can. They're going to, most protagonists are willing to sacrifice everything. They sacrifice anything, or just about. Want to be clear that the world you create in your story, the context, is all important to how these things get worked out. So to have a great story is not about, a hero trying to save the world from an arch villain who's trying to literally blow up the world with nuclear high-powered weapons. That is not, every story does not have to be that. A story can be a child who wants something that they pursue. The context of the story is all important for how one addresses these elements. But here's the question: if the protagonist knows what they want and they pursue it with everything they've got, and they sacrifice everything or anything to get it, why don't they get it? Why doesn't the protagonist get what they want? It seems natural that they would get what they want. Well, there's a specific reason for this, which is the antagonist. Okay, now we're on to the next major element of a story that makes a story, the antagonist. Now, when I say protagonist, I mean protagonist or protagonists, plural. Anytime I say protagonist. When I say antagonist, I mean antagonist and or forces of antagonism. Antagonism can come from many places. Most good stories, almost all of them, there is a human antagonist that is one of the contributing forces of antagonism. Okay, now here's a little myth that a lot of people struggle with. It's a little bit of I would call it a little bit of a secret. The antagonist provides conflict and obstacles that stop the protagonist from getting what they want. That's not the myth. That's no. The myth is that every story requires a protagonist actively pursuing what they want and encountering forces of antagonism. That's required for every story. If it doesn't have that, it's not a story. And it's something else. And if you say, well, then I want to make something that's not a story. Hey, more power to you. You can make art. You can free associate. You can, I'm talking about stories. Everything is not a story. Just like a pile of rubble is not a building, or, a string quartet by Mozart is not rock and roll. But the myth, so this is like a logic issue. Every story has to have a conflict between the protagonist and forces of antagonism. That's the conflict. So there's no story without conflict. But the myth is people think you just throw in more conflict, like adding salt to cooking. It's like, we just got to put, You just got to keep adding salt and it'll just keep tasting better and better and better. Well, those of you that cook know that's not true. Yeah, something people say, some people debate it, but you say, no, you got to have some salt in there. But how much? Well, you don't want too much. But anyway, the thing about conflict is you don't just keep pouring conflict into a story and thinking it's going to make it better. The conflict has to come from the antagonist in conflict with the protagonist. That's a specific place that the obstacles and the conflict comes from, is from that. That's another area of study. Okay, so Jaws, right? I've got these 4 movies I'm using for examples that you may have seen or at least heard of. Jaws, the antagonist is a great white shark. It's a formidable antagonist, right? And the formidability, the formidable qualities of the great white shark are established in the famous first scene. Star Wars, another formidable antagonist, Darth Vader. Okay, great antagonist, famous one. And then there's the antagonist of Psycho, which is Norman Bates's mother. And as you can see here, she is very active in pursuit of her goals. And then the antagonist in Get Out are the Armitage family. You've got Jeremy Armitage, Dean and Missy Armitage. Missy has a superpower of hypnotism, which of course allows us to explore themes of subconscious and trauma in this particular film to great effect. And then of course we have Chris Washington's girlfriend, Rose Armitage. So these are 4 formidable antagonists, but we don't stop there in Get Out. As in many movies or many stories, we've actually got the whole community, of which many of them come over for this garden party to celebrate things, and they are also contributing antagonists. So we have these very formidable antagonists in all 4 of these sample movies that I'm looking at right now. Okay, so now we're going to move on to story endings. So a story ending must include 3 things. What are they? We're going to talk about them. There's 3 of them. Now, again, I'm speaking a little bit in broad strokes because I have a time limit of 45 minutes or so before we get to the Q&A. And but yeah, the ending of a story must have 3 things. Let's talk about what they are. The conflict between the protagonist and the antagonist builds step by step. The action rises, it escalates to what? To a climax. Every story's got to have a climax. And this climax now, we've talked about this idea of story being a craft. And if you want to craft your story and design your story, you got to really focus on your protagonist, what they want, how they actively pursue what they want, showing the inciting incident in the story that mobilizes your protagonist into action. Great, good idea. But the inciting incident could happen before the story starts. It could. This conflict, for the antagonist and this conflict, and then it rises, the action rises, step by step, incrementally it rises. And it builds up to a climax. And this climax is very, very important, as we know in stories, in the movies we like, stories we like. So here's one thing about climaxes. Climax must go further and be more extreme than anything the audience can imagine or predict. So some pressure on the storyteller here. Storyteller has to come up with something that the audience cannot imagine or predict. And yet we know our audience is composed of people who are expert consumers of storytelling. So this is challenging. You want to come up with a great story, you got to come up with a great climax. It's required. Got to have a climax, and it's got to go further, farther, and be more extreme than anything the audience can imagine or predict. I'm going to go off on a little tangent here and just, talk about the nature of stories being transgressive, which creates certain challenges perhaps today here in 2021. But you can go back and look up your stories in the Bible, the Iliad, the Odyssey, Ovid's Metamorphoses, New Testament, Old Testament, mythology, or you can just Listen to the news. Stories are by nature transgressive. So a lot of young and inexperienced storytellers, they struggle with this climax because they're like, I don't want to overstay, and I don't want to offend anybody. But you can look at your favorite stories and see how many of your favorite stories don't have something in them that will provoke or offend someone. So yeah, it does create challenges, and it's nobody said this is going to be easy. It's not. I'm just saying, coming up with a story that is going to capture the imagination, engage a broad audience in the world today amongst all these expert consumers of stories. It's not easy. But yeah, your climax has to go really far, be really extreme. And then there's this other thing about climaxes. They must provide absolute and irreversible change to the protagonist, and this is important, and or the world of the protagonist. There are certain protagonists, James Bond, for instance. I think maybe I haven't watched them, but I hear rumors that in the most recent James Bond movies, maybe he changes a little bit. But it used to be that James Bond was fascinating because he didn't change at all. But the world around him changed. A lot of people would die. Typically, the antagonist, the villain, would always die, and then the world, by the end, would be a safer place for a bunch of people. Maybe all of humanity, or maybe just the other people in Her Majesty's Secret Service or something. But anyway, absolute and irreversible change. Well, you can see that the demands of storytelling, absolute and irreversible change. That's a big deal. But earlier I talked about, okay, you can make an amazing story about a child who just wants something specific. And then by the end of that story, that child is going to learn something or lose their innocence, or something's going to happen where they will never be the same. And that's the absolute and irreversible change for that story again. Okay, well, we got one of the three things that story endings must have: a climax. And we've started to acknowledge how that it's not just, it's a climax, it's kind of a climax. No, there's some very big issues that you have to achieve as a storyteller to have a proper climax to engage and please your very demanding audience, whoever they might be, even if it's the one person interviewing for a job that wants to hear a good narrative that's coherent. Okay, when you're telling a story, dramatic questions are raised, or asked if you prefer, during the story. The story raises dramatic questions. Every single war film has a dramatic question: will the protagonist survive? If you can find a war film that doesn't ask that question, let me know. Never heard of it. Maybe it exists. So every war film, every romantic comedy asks the question: will they get together? I'm going to give you a little teaser, like how does this work? We know they're going to get together because it's a romantic comedy that's doing well at the box office. So how do I, the audience, not know they're going to get together? Like, what's my suspension of disbelief? Don't have time to talk about that today. Interesting question, though, which has very specific answers. A horror film, will the protagonist survive? Will they be able to destroy the monster, etc.? Then there's the main dramatic question, but I will say that there's a story that the dramatic question all stories have, which is, will the protagonist get what they want? So you got to answer that question at the end of the film. What we call this is the resolution of the story. So the resolution of the story must answer all the dramatic questions that were raised and asked. Now here, I know I'm definitely now in a controversial territory. I know this because there's so many people are so attached to the concept of ambiguous endings. And it's an area of great misunderstanding. But I will share with you right now what I have up on this slide: ambiguous endings. And I put that in quotation marks because the films you like that you think are ambiguous, that have ambiguous endings, they're not ambiguous endings. Ambiguous endings that are really ambiguous, where you don't answer the dramatic question, did the protagonist get what they want? Or you make a romantic comedy, you don't answer the question, are they going to get together? Or you make a war film and you don't answer the question, is the protagonist going to survive? That's the province of amateurs and people who aren't really storytellers. Now, I'm just going to clarify, because I know some of you are like, wait a minute, La Ventura, David Fincher's Zodiac, there's both of those movies. The question becomes, will the mystery ever be solved? Will these people solve the mystery? The answer is no, they're not going to solve the mystery. That's the resolution. Okay. And that's a fairly recent development in narratives, and narratives can evolve and change over time with people. And actually, I'm going to spend a few short sentences talking about social media here at the end as we're coming to the close, and how these principles of narrative structure actually are very applicable to social media. The other thing is, when you, in a romantic comedy, when they do get together at the end, you can start a new story, just a scene maybe where you ask a new question, which is, oh, but what's going to happen now? Are they going to actually live together happily ever after? And that's starting a new story. It's not an ambiguous ending. But anyway, trust me, just answer the dramatic questions at the end of your story. The only reason not to is because you want to alienate your audience and you want them to be upset and disturbed and scratching their head and angry at you, the filmmaker. And if that's what you want to do, this is a great solution. Don't answer the dramatic questions. Third thing, here we are. Every story that has ever found an audience has a reversal. 3 components to the reversal. Okay, an ending has 3 components: the climax, the resolution, and the reversal. Now, sorry, the reversal has 3 components. Good things come in 3s. First, you create an expectation in the audience. The audience thinks they know how the story is going to end. The audience is like, I know. You, the storyteller, have led them to believe that they know how the story is going to end. You create this expectation. Not only does the story not end that way, the opposite thing happens. The opposite thing. All stories have this. I know it sounds totally insane. You're like, this is impossible. Well, again, make a list of your 10 favorite films, or your 100 or 500 of your favorite films. They all 500 have exactly this. The audience thinks they know how the story is going to end. Then the opposite thing happens. And this opposite thing that happens provides a rush of insight. For the first time, with this reversal, you truly, for the first time, understand who the protagonist really is, or what the world of the protagonist really is like, or both. I stole this from a student who, as was mentioned, I teach. I'm founding faculty at a fairly recently established MFA film school called the Fierstein Graduate School of Cinema. It's in the Brooklyn Navy Yard in Steiner Studios. And one of my students who made the best thesis film made there over the past few years told me this. I think it's hilarious. You probably won't find it funny. I do. Every story must have a beginning, a middle, and a reversal. Barrel of laughs, right? Okay, so story is everything. A little word of advice is, if you are trying to get somewhere fascinating, you're trying to get to, I don't know where you're going, but if your plane is forced to land in Los Angeles and you have to spend time in Los Angeles, you have to go to like social events and there's people in the media industry there and you don't know what to say, my recommendation, just say this, just say, story is everything. You can say it like with gravitas, all the better. People go, oh my God, I agree so much. It's just, if you don't know what else to say, just try this line out. You can try it out in New York too, but it's not going to work quite as well. But I have a variation on this, which is the reversal is everything. If you really want to be a craft of storytelling, so of everything else I've talked about in this brief presentation, this is the thing, this reversal. This is the thing that maybe I can crack open the craft of storytelling and introduce you to the idea that there's really a whole world over there of story design and story creation, which is, and again, think of your favorite film. What TV show did you watch yesterday? What movie have you watched? And they all have this reversal thing. At this point, I want to credit 2 writers who I have borrowed liberally from in my teaching. The main one is Aristotle and his book, Poetics, written in 364 BC maybe or something. I can't remember the exact date. And then Robert McKee is quite well known. He wrote a book called Story. And he himself said, listen, you can find almost everything in his book Story is from Aristotle's Poetics. But Story, it's been around for a long time, but it really kind of made a lot of effort to define terms that we could use for narrative structure. And those terms have become industry standard. But a lot of people consider, Story by Robert McKee kind of like old fashioned and not that useful, but I do recommend those things. So story endings must have 3 things: a climax, a resolution, a reversal. And if you don't have those things, so let's look at these examples. So this is spoiler alert. Hey, spoiler, if you haven't seen Jaws, spoiler alert. So this is Roy Scheider. His boat is sinking. The shark has killed the shark killer, Quint, already devoured him. But Roy Scheider has this stroke of ingenuity and genius where he puts a tank of something or other. It's probably 78% nitrogen and 21% oxygen and 0.9% argon. I don't know. He throws it in the mouth of the shark, and he's going to kill the shark. It's a reversal. We think he's going to get eaten by the shark. Oh my God, it's so sad. But no, he kills the shark, and man triumphs over nature, at least in Jaws. Okay, we got Luke Skywalker in the Starfighter, and he's going to destroy the Death Star. Why? Because he has the Force. But he's able to, we think he's doomed, you know, it's never going to happen. But then he uses the Force and he destroys the Starfighter. We cannot, when we're talking about reversals, I got to bring up Empire Strikes Back, resonates with everybody. Luke, I am your father. Darth Vader is Luke Skywalker's father. And of course, this resonates with everybody because all of our fathers are at least part Darth Vader on some level. So it's just, oh my God, my father's Darth Vader too. It just resonates like crazy. And everybody is like, oh, it just shook us up so much. What a great reversal though, right? Okay, sorry to submit you this. It's only a few frames in the movie. This is Norman Bates' mother. This is what Norman Bates' mother looked like in the movie right now. She has been taxidermied. And so it turns out that Norman Bates has been dressing up as his mother and is the murderer. This is like a cross dissolve in the last shot, or the second to last shot, or one of the last shots in the film. And then here, you know, in Get Out, you know, we've got the double reversal. I mean, the thing is, usually movies don't have just one reversal; they might have a couple. But this is the end with it. You know, he's killed the whole family, killed all these antagonists. Police car drives up, and we assume he's going to now, you know, be arrested or killed. And instead, it's his friend Rod from the TSA saving him. It's a reversal. Happy endings do occur. Of course, you can go research the alternate endings for this movie if you wish and see the two different reversals that were explored. Okay, and then we have Citizen Kane we're just going to touch upon, which is opening scene is Charles Foster Kane is dying. I think he's holding this in his hand. It's a hint. And he says Rosebud. And then we have a scene in the movie where we see this sled being covered. And then in the end, we see the sled being thrown in the fire. It's Rosebud. And this is an example of, you know, something that it's very hard intellectually to analyze and understand why this is such a great reversal. But, you know, everybody thought that Rosebud was like a business deal or a nickname for his mistress or something. It was, but instead it was his sled as a child, because what he was longing for is innocence. And he just, if he could go back in time and not have the money and the power and be the most powerful man in the world, maybe he would have. And so this is the end of my slides, but we're still gonna have a Q&A. And I think we have time to look at a couple of really short movies and talk about them for a moment. But I do wanna, so I said I'd talk about social media because social media is based in, memes are based in narratives, okay? So here's this Rosebud, and then here's a meme that I found that, I don't know if everybody, if you're not a news junkie, you might not get this, but this sled says Covefe, and it says, oh, I get it, it was the name of his sled. So this is an example. One thing you can do with stories is you map one story onto another, right? So, you know, this is an example of how in one image we create a meme that is based in two different narratives intersecting. It's really sophisticated stuff, right? So yeah, here's a summary. I already went over this stuff, so I'm going to leave it up here, but I'm not going to talk about it. So we want to get to Q&A, but I want to look at, let's just watch two movies right now. One is 15 seconds long, and it's a famous social media thing. So, and then I want to show a 30-second commercial. So we're going to watch 2 movies. One's 15 seconds long, one's 30 seconds long. The 30-second commercial is a Samsung commercial that I directed. It's all computer generated. And I just want to show, even when something's 15 seconds long or 24 seconds or whatever the animation was, it still contains these basic elements of storytelling. So let's watch those, and then I'm going to talk about them for literally 1 minute, then we'll get in the Q&A. So let's see. Nadine, can you play those 2 movies now? You can play them back to back.
Live your best life. What, buddy? You can't get that shit.
yeah, let me just talk about that now. Then we'll look at the 30-second movie. We won't play them back to back. Nadine, can you hear me? Can you just make me full screen again?
You're full screen.
Okay, great. So the rat is the protagonist. What does the rat want? The pizza. Does the rat actively pursue this desire? Absolutely. What are the forces of antagonism? Well, the pizza's way too big for the rat to carry it. Not only that, there's some guy, shooting this on his phone that the rat is scared of. So the rat's dealing with a human that it's terrified of and the pizza, but he still follows through and fights for it. Okay, it's only 15 seconds long. Climax, reversal, resolution. It's slightly unresolved, but the rat, we think it's going to run away, but it's coming back. It's coming back for that pizza. When you limit your story to being 15 seconds long, sometimes you're going to bend a couple of these rules a little bit. So now let's look at the TV commercial, the Whale TV Samsung commercial. It's 30 seconds long.
Introducing the Galaxy S8 with an infinity screen that gives you less to hold and much more to see, and makes your world infinitely bigger.
Okay, so that's a 25-second story, and it's about a diver. It's all computer generated, by the way. The diver is looking for something to photograph, actively pursuing a desire to photograph something, and then the diver encounters this giant whale. And what's the reversal? The reversal is he follows the whale. You would again think that he would flee this gigantic thing, but he wants his desire so much that he follows it. And by the way, the messaging was that the wraparound screen was that you move beyond the edges of the screen, which was built into the story, which was for messaging, but whatever, that's a whole nother topic. So anyway, that's my presentation. I'm happy to take any and all questions at this time in the time that we have remaining.
Thank you, Mark. Very enlightening. And the audience was paying rapt attention. So we have a number of questions. First of all, we all love the pizza rat. Somebody said it's setting up for a sequel. So very good storytelling there. So let's just jump in so we don't miss any of our very interested audience participants. First of all, are there any essential texts you would recommend to those interested in developing our storytelling skills?
Well, I did mention them already, and those are only two I'm going to mention for now, but I will put them up on the screen since I anticipated this question. So it's Poetics by Aristotle, written in 335 BC, and Story by Robert McKee, written in 1997 AD. And just a little footnote about Aristotle. Had kind of an interesting life, that he was a student of Plato and a teacher of Alexander the Great, which is interesting. I'm not promoting, rampant military imperialism, but I'm taking note of the historical facts. So anyway, yeah, these are the two texts I would recommend. I mean, there's a million books about storytelling, and it's hard to find really good ones. I would only say that you want to be careful because there's a lot of people. Okay, I'm going to say that there's a template approach to storytelling that I hate. Okay, and it's this idea, the hero's journey. I hate the concept of the hero's journey. Yes, like 25 to 40% of all stories but it's like a templatized approach to storytelling that, yeah, if you want to make the next, 3-movie sequel for Hollywood about a young person you go follow that template and join the thousands of other people doing that. But I don't like the templatized approach. It does work to make commercial accessible cinema, but it doesn't necessarily help you tell your story. But there's a lot of books. It's a longer, but yeah, these are the two books I recommend right now. And like I said, story, yeah, but it's hard to find a great book on screenwriting. I'm trying to write one right now, so we'll see.
Thank you. You should let us know once that's coming out. So you spoke about the elements, the important elements. One of it, and I think that was that is something to discuss. The protagonist has to pursue a desire. Does the desire have to be a dramatic one? One question is, can the desire be something more pro-social, like building a community?
Yeah, the desire can be anything. I mean, the point of the application of the principles that I've presented to you is applying these principles can apply to any protagonist who wants anything. So I would say that you could come up with any protagonist or group of protagonists and give them any desire and just have them actively pursue that. But yes, to actively try to build a community sounds like a great desire to build a story around. Absolutely.
So one of the fascinating aspects of a story occurs, of course, when the protagonist has conflicting desires. Not only is he thwarted by antagonists, but perhaps by his own inner conflicts. Can you comment on that?
Yeah, so forces of antagonism can be circumstantial. It can be the weather. It could be the subway not working. It could be, normally there's going to be a human being in there that is at least one antagonist, but the character can be their own antagonist, absolutely. Characters do have conflicts. Stories are reductive though, so it usually makes sense to have a primary desire, but the thing about these things is they become infinitely complex when you start, because the desire of the protagonist can change during the story. We already had the example of Psycho where the first protagonist in Act 1 dies at the end of Act 1, so we have to have a new protagonist who takes over. So as the story develops, there's events where the desire of the protagonist can change dramatically or reverse themselves. So yeah, the application of these principles, like I don't mean, when I selected these 4 movies to show you, which all, they're all I tried to pick movies that you likely saw. So I don't know if there's anybody in the audience that has seen none of those movies. That's why I chose those movies. But so I'm not saying you should only pattern your own stories after such broadly successful cinema. That's not my point at all. So yeah, characters can have, go ahead.
There are, of course, successful films, also commonly known, and some examples were given by the audience where the protagonist is more passively drifting through life, not actively pursuing a desire, and yet it's compelling. For example, Pride and Prejudice, where Elizabeth doesn't have a goal she's actively pursuing, or The Big Lebowski, where things more happen to the Big Lebowski.
Okay, so the dude in The Big Lebowski, this is a commonly stated one, but his carpet, someone urinates on his carpet and he's trying to get his carpet clean and get it back. And he's very active in pursuing those things. So the dude is a great example of a character who is naturally, but this is where people get confused. They say, well, he wants to be passive, but then he's out being active. He is, and he, Pride and Prejudice, I can't speak to because I have actually watched part of one of the movie versions in the last few months, but I can't speak to it, but I assure you that the protagonist, I mean, I know I'm speaking maybe inappropriately, but confidently, I assure you that the protagonists are active. And yes, you can, the context of the world is all important. We have an incredible piece of cinema on television, Handmaid's Tale, and the protagonist is in danger of being murdered or having her eye plucked out if she is too active. But we create these sort of, I don't know, micro actions that within her world, she's taking these incredible risks of her life and her physical welfare. But in the context of her world, these are incredible actions. So you would watch it and you say, oh, but she has to repress herself, but you can watch it and see what actions she takes. So it's there. Just want to be clear that our painters aren't there to advertise their brushstrokes any more than storytellers are there to advertise their narrative structure. They are there to disguise their technique, so they don't make it easy for you to break it down. But if I would be happy to go watch, and read, Pride and Prejudice and come back and explain how all the protagonists in it are active, and I guarantee that they are. But they may not seem so on the surface on first glance.
So I think successful storytelling really is about the complexity and subtlety, as one oftentimes loses interest when everything is obvious, as in romantic comedies. They will get together when the outcome is clear and there may not be a reversal. So how does this apply to daily life? One question is also, is storytelling in the fictional sense different from storytelling in an autobiographical or marketing context?
Okay, well, I think, I know that Mark Twain is any most amazing quotes that resonate. Half of them are attributed to Mark Twain. I don't know how many of them actually are, but there's a quote attributed to Mark Twain that says the greatest fiction is an autobiography. That there is no greater fictional piece of text than an autobiography is the message. And I think you could say that all stories are fictional. All media is fictional. One of the obstacles to getting people to become storytellers about themselves is that they're like, no, but it's not exactly true. The audience of your story does not want it to be true. They want it to be entertaining and engaging. They want it to convey the meaning that you want to convey. And the reason is you're conveying the essential truth of something through something which is a false fabrication. Right. But the thing is, none of the principles I've discussed have anything in opposition to art. I understand the 4 films I chose do. In fact, you know what? We have a 1-minute movie. I'd like to show that right now to speak to this issue of structure and art. I have the 1-minute movie. It's called Time Lapse. Let's play Time Lapse right now. And we'll cut it off at the credits, please, Nadine, if you don't mind.
Vamos, cariño, arriba.
Un ratito más.
Vas a llegar tarde al colegio.
5 minutitos.
Cuento hasta 10. 1, 2.
Que se pare el tiempo. Que se
3,
pare el tiempo. Que se pare el tiempo. Que se
4.
pare el tiempo. Que se pare el tiempo.
So anybody would probably call that an art film. We have a protagonist, a kid who wants to stop time. He tries to stop time, he does. The reversal is he succeeded. The resolution and the message is the consequences of stopping time and freezing time. This is a myth of storytelling. The myth of storytelling is people who don't want to do the work to study the craft of storytelling think that the narrative structure is antithetical to art. This is false. All the art films you love are completely structured, 100% of them. If you are going to want to talk about Stan Brakhage or Kurt Schwitters about, light vibrating off the wall, but I doubt you guys are rushing home to watch those truly abstract films. All the films that you think are art films are completely structured. It's the only reason you're watching it because the structure is there, but it's disguised, it's hidden, it's artfully constructed. But that's the truth. All those art filmmakers, all of them, they're all experts at narrative structure. That's the reason their films get made and watched.
Does that apply to documentaries, for example?
100%.
Yes,
The documentaries are all structured. It's just that typically the structure is often determined after the footage is shot, which is, and documentaries are fictional. They are constructions and fabrications of the reality. I know people don't like to hear that, but it's just a fact.
So what about films that don't have an obvious climax? An audience member recently watched Nomadland, which is Academy Award nominated, great acclaim, but on the surface does not maybe comply with all the elements of narrative structure.
Sadly, I have not watched Nomadland. I plan to. Sometimes a climax does not mean it's an action climax. For instance, if you have a protagonist who has an incredible change that's internal to them, and that internal change is clearly shown to the audience, that the audience shares that with that protagonist transformation as a reversal or climax. It doesn't have to feel like an action climax, and so again, I would be happy to, Yes, but I'm sure that Nomadland has a climax, a reversal, and a resolution. I'm positive because everybody I talked to has been watching it, and it's 100% of the films I've ever heard people talk about en masse have all these things. And so, again, I haven't watched it, but I assure you that it does. I'd be happy, but I'll watch it soon, and if you want to, I can explain it later.
That brings us to another question. So the reversal can be in the character's inner life as well. Or does it always have to resemble a plot twist?
It's anything you want it to be. The point is the audience has to be significant. The audience has to care about it. The audience have to think they know what's going to happen. And then that the thing they think is going to happen, the opposite thing happens. So I'm sure in Nomadland that you think you know how the movie is going to end. And then not only does it not end the way you think it's going to end, the opposite thing happens. I'm sure of it. I haven't seen it. I just know that it's got enough popularity that I'm positive that that's true. And those of you that have seen, I'm not reading the chat because I'm just not reading the chat. Unfortunately, it would be too distracting for me. But the thing is, none of these things prevent you from making artistic, resonant, complex, subtle. It doesn't matter. It's not about the plot twist is not a cheap device enforced on you. It's what makes a story a story. Does the story of Christ have a reversal? Oh, it has about 5. Okay, but anyway, what else?
So what would you say is a screenplay that has had the most impact on you and your writing?
On me? Well, I'm going to say that I recently studied Passion of Joan of Arc by Carl Dreyer, made in 1928, very, very carefully, and I think it's arguably the greatest film ever made. It's incredibly pertinent.
That's very interesting. Speaking of the greatest film ever made, oftentimes Citizen Kane is cited to be that film. Of the many Academy Award nominations, it eventually only won for screenplay, but suggesting that the narrative played an important role. What would you attribute that success or the elevation to the pantheon of greatest films to?
Okay. The question is, why do so many people think Citizen Kane is the greatest film of all time?
And is it only due to, the narrative?
Well, no. I mean, so the thing is, having the things that I've described in this short lecture in your film and your story doesn't make it a great story. It just makes it a story, right? I just told you today what a story has to have to be a story. Doesn't make it great. Did you do these things? Because everybody in Hollywood that makes movies knows this stuff, and they make a lot of crappy movies because they don't put heart and soul into it. So this isn't having the structure doesn't mean it's good. Citizen Kane, it's I would say it just has all the elements are working in concert. It's like it is a film. It's like a complete artwork of everything: sound, image, editing, story, but the story is extraordinary. And I would say the structure of the story, and that's why I wanted to show the reversal again, that people would say there's no reversal in Citizen Kane. There isn't a reversal. I say, no, Rosebud, that's the reversal. But why? It doesn't make sense. Because the most powerful man in the world just wanted to go back in time, like the time lapse, kind of, except he had a bad outcome. That wanted to go back in time and not have the money to spend the rest of his life with his mother, even though his father was physically abusive. And that's just, if you go watch Citizen Kane, there's a scene where it's revealed that the reason the mother wants to send her son away is because the father is physically abusive. So it's just, I can't say why, but I can just tell you that there's no aspect of the film that is not extraordinary. There is no aspect of film craft that is not extraordinary in Citizen Kane, in my opinion. I'm not here to tell you should think it's the greatest film of all time, or you should even love it, but it's just every element of film craft is extraordinary in the film. So I would say that's, people are fascinated by power, and it's a film about power. So it plays into, and supposedly it's about William Randolph Hearst, which gave it a foundation of relevant news interest. I don't know.
Of course, and that is also a very powerful reversal that many people can identify with, which brings us to another question. So some of favorite movies are ones in which the protagonist has a hidden desire. Either they're not really aware of it, or the audience can't tell until later in the movie. Any other examples?
Well, here's a question I like to ask. It's kind of a joke, but you guys will know the answer to the question. A Hollywood movie with a protagonist who thinks what they want is money. It's a Hollywood movie, remember, what do they find out they really need by the end of the film? Love. Okay, so you know, the thing is, want and need is we have the conscious and the subconscious. We have the explicit and the implicit. We have you know, the subtext. Of course, there's no time to talk about subtext except to say that, yes, this is not to say your protagonist isn't complex. This is just to say this is the motor that drives the story, and this is how it has to end. The absolutely incredibly complex applications of human psychology and character are what storytellers try to achieve, but they usually achieve them through some degree of simplicity. I know that sounds contradictory, but it's the nature. Stories are reductive. Once you achieve the reduction, you can build complexity on top of that.
So how do you raise dramatic questions that might not have a clear answer without making it unfocused? For example, you may raise moral issues or a conflict of ideologies. How do you walk the knife's edge? Well,
I mean, you know, films need to, I mean, for you guys collectively, when you watch a movie or hear a story, you kind of are going to hold the story to be accountable for being about what it says it's about, right? You don't want to watch a story that says early on, oh, we're going to examine morality, or we're going to examine morality in 2021 in America. And then halfway through, it just changes its mind and turns into a cheap thriller. You're going to be frustrated with that, right? So you present your themes and your subject matter up front and in the film, and then you have to follow through with them, but it's up to you as an artist. Now, what I'm going to say this, that the story is the device to deliver your artistry and your worldview to your audience. It's not an obstacle, it's the device that gets it there, right? You say, well, here's what I want to express. Fantastic. And I've been teaching for 20 years. I encounter some students who say, I want to make a non-narrative film. Of course, I ask them, who are your favorite non-narrative filmmakers? And usually they don't have one. Every once in a while, I encounter somebody who understands non-narrative cinema and they make a non-narrative movie. I'm all for it. But if you say, but to a filmmaker that says, I'm just focused on aesthetics. I just want to create aesthetics. Like, great. Well, if you want people to watch it, then just attach your incredible aesthetic vision to a story. The story is the delivery mechanism of your art and your ideas and your worldview to your audience. And you look at yourself. How many of you are going to be seeking out statistical analyses of something versus watching stories? I suspect not many of you are like, oh, you know, I really got to read up on all the statistics about COVID this week. I'm going to really dig into all the statistical analyses by all the epidemiologists. Probably not. Are you going to watch stories about it and engage in stories about it? Yes, because that's just how you engage, and that's how you absorb information. So as the story creator, that's what you're tapping into.
So if the reversal is really, there's one other audience question. If the reversal really is everything, doesn't that mean everything you have just told us is the polar opposite of reality? What I believe this question is asking, well, in real life, we never really get the outcome we hope for.
I'm sorry, can you read that one more time? I think
if the reversal in a story or in a film really is everything, doesn't that mean everything you just told us is the polar opposite of reality?
No, because if the thing you think, memory, okay, dreams and memory, okay, so think about what you remember from your childhood. The things you remember from your childhood are probably narrative based, right? And so what we remember in our lives is reversed expectations. You know, the interesting things about our life are not like, oh, I wanted to get this and then I methodically moved towards it, then I got it and it was great. That's not what you're focused on, okay? You're focused on the reversals in your own life and the revelations in your own life, you know, because here's another way to think about it. We spend our time in our real lives trying to figure out what the hell is really going on. What is really going on? What is really going on with our government? What is really going on in New York? What is really going on with our community? What is really going on with all these things? This person I'm talking to, what do they really want? What are they really feeling? What are they really thinking? And we often don't get the answers to these questions. Well, in stories, you get the answers, and it's in the resolution and the reversal where you get delivered those answers. And that's why we love stories. We're like, I want to go to a place where I get the answer at the end. It could be a tragic ending, but it's still resolved. Life, yeah. So the thing is, stories are not life. Stories are different than life. And if you want to be a storyteller, you have to acknowledge that and understand that, and try to understand that relationship. When people make a decision, do I live my life or do I consume a story? They're not the same thing. They're very different things.
So I think the answer to the question asked is sort of yes. It's not the same as reality, but we like stories because they are somewhat more simple. But yet we do tell a story of our lives. There is no clear-cut reality.
Well, people try to seek out meaning in their lives, but yeah, being a storyteller is making meaning. Is delivering.
That is the best definition you've provided so far. Really, that is why good stories are compelling, because we all seek meaning. So what about The Sopranos non-ending is another question.
You'll notice that people are absolutely fascinated. Most people say they disliked and hated the ending because it declined to provide a resolution. But you have to understand that the people that made it had a financial interest to not resolve it. Nobody's asked about television, but television is an interesting thing because every episode has to resolve some things, but leave some things unresolved to keep you watching, right? So it's multiple narrative threads, it's added layers of complexity. But The Sopranos, remember I said you want to piss people off, don't resolve it. Well, The Sopranos got incredible PR by pissing people off by not resolving the ending. Good for them, because people already loved the story and loved the ending. Now, Breaking Bad was completely resolved in the final episode, and so people had this complete sense of resolution with the way Breaking Bad resolved because the storytellers provided that. For whatever reason, The Sopranos decided not to. Was it for financial reasons that they wanted another season, or they wanted to lead into movies, or I don't know, but they intentionally chose, and they knew what they were doing, and they probably knew that they would generate an incredible amount of public, because here we are talking about it right now, right? It's long time ago that it came out. So they were, were they playing a publicity game? Maybe, I don't know, but they certainly made a conscious effort to not provide the level of resolution that audiences crave and hunger for and demand from their stories.
So on that note, how important is marketing or publicity that is part of the storytelling? How much is it responsible for the success of a narrative film?
Well, I will say that I myself, every time there's a movie that had no movie stars and did not have a great marketing campaign and it's very successful, I'm like, I have to go see that movie because I'm sure it has an incredible story. A movie comes out that has a marketing campaign and movie stars and everything is packaged. I mean, I'm sorry. I mean, I don't mean to talk about movies I haven't seen, but I've yet to find one person who likes Wonder Woman 84. Okay. I have yet to find one person, and people are passionately talking about how they didn't like it. I haven't seen it, and certainly I have no particular desire to see it right now since I can't find one single. I'm waiting for one single person who says they like it.
Terrible storytelling.
Well, anyway, but the thing is, it was packaged, and I'm sure it made pretty close to the amount of money that it was packaged in order to make, right? So there's a movie that it's just everything about it is packaged and marketed, so that doesn't need to. I don't know why though it would not have a good story. It's a mystery to me. I don't know. I don't have an explanation for that. But it is an example of a movie that had everything in place. Marketing, all the marketing was in place, and the stars and the franchise and I bet the box office is going to be just fine, even though
maybe it was bad directing too. But here's a comment. I found one YouTuber that loves Wonder Woman 84. So there, tastes are still different. So we are coming to the end. There's it's really very interested audience. Let's see if we can answer a few more questions for a couple more minutes. So we've talked about plot twists and of course, okay. This harkens back a little to the last point made about the ambiguous ending. What is your definition of ambiguity, and how is an ending made more ambiguous than another, or why should it be? Why should ambiguity be regulated?
Well, the only thing, again, like any craft, the reason you study the craft and you apply the craft is to get the result you want. We did just come up with an example of a final conclusion to a very, very famous franchise, The Sopranos, where they did not resolve it, and people got very angry about it. It's like a huge controversy. And I just made a case on how it might have been intentional. It may have gotten exactly what they wanted. So now, to say that your story needs to answer the dramatic questions is not to say that you can't have ambiguity and make a film about ambiguity. I didn't say that. The only thing I said was the dramatic questions that your story poses need to be answered. So you can make I just watched 1984, which was the film made in 1984. I highly recommend. I'd never seen it, and I think it's like a borderline masterpiece. It's incredible and also highly pertinent to our times, I think. And if the story is an interpersonal conflict, and that's what your story is, but it's taking place in a broad social political spectrum it's filled with ambiguity, that's fine. I didn't say you can't do that. You can make a world of enormous ambiguity, but the dramatic questions that your story is focused on, those need to be answered. So again, you want to be careful. I understand that there's a strong impulse to be like, no, stories are whatever I say and do that I say as a story that hatches from my heart and soul. And I'm here to say, no, stories are stories, and there's a craft behind it, et cetera, et cetera. But so people are like, any sort of structure is an imposition. No, it's not an imposition. You don't have to tell stories. You can make art. You can make your own personal art or other things. But what I'm explaining is what stories are. And so, you can make, if you want to make just like you can make a story like about a character who's naturally passive, like The Big Lebowski. You can make a story that takes place in a world filled with ambiguity. And that's the context. That's fine. But when you raise dramatic questions in the story that are central to the story, then you need to answer those, or the audience is going to be angry and frustrated.
Can you think of any films that break these conventions of storytelling and still do it well? Or still, I mean, it's kind of a contradiction in term. If they break the conventions of storytelling, are they still telling a good story, I guess?
Well, I want to be clear. I watch a lot of obscure, weird art films, but I just discovered 2 films by Lucrecia Martel. She's an Argentinian filmmaker. One is called Zama, and it's about colonialism in Argentina. And another one is called The Headless Woman. I can't say the Spanish title. And these are both beautifully constructed, incredible films in there, but the artistry, and they're filled with ambiguity and richness. So if you're looking for a film, I just watched these like a couple of weeks ago, and I thought they were extraordinary. I think they're completely structured, but they're structured. The stories are structured, but they're dealing with a great amount of ambiguity and mystery. And so I would recommend those as things that appear to be weird art films that are unstructured, but they're completely structured. It's just the structure is a little bit hard to find, but I think it's there completely. So those are 2 examples of films I recently watched. I just want to be clear. I love weird art films, but they're always structured. All of them. David Lynch's films are completely structured.
Oh, right.
But go ahead.
Any other examples of more subtle examples of climax structured storytelling, or in addition to the more straightforward ones that you gave with the movies you analyzed?
Right this very second, other than these 2 Lucrecia Martel films that I mentioned, I don't have anything on the tip of my tongue.
Sure. What was the last? No, that's good enough. What was the last film that surprised you as a storyteller yourself? That learning the craft of storytelling.
Well, I
from watching and enjoying films sometimes.
Well, I did just mention The Passion of Joan of Arc, which I find to be it's like the Rosetta Stone of cinema, except I can't recommend the film highly enough. It's I'm endlessly fascinated by it. But I would say any movie that I really like, it always surprises me. I mean, that's the whole thing about the design of story, is the whole thing about the reversal is it leads to you expect something, and then the opposite thing happens, which is like reveals what the story is really about for the first time. It's the design of storytelling. So stories are just intended to surprise you. As you know, sometimes you try to tell a story about your real life, and if it doesn't have a reversal at the end, people are like, wait, oh, huh, like, why'd you waste our
Why
time?
did we listen to you for
Why did you
10
waste our
minutes?
time if it doesn't build to a climax and a reversal? It's like,
All right.
you know.
So maybe to end on this note, as a concluding here, more comment, but another documentary filmmaker, Lisa Vogel, says she went into a project thinking she was making a movie, and then it turned out it was something different. This is also a reversal I have experienced. So it's been very helpful to hear the fundamentals of storytelling over and over, and I can't hear them enough. So thank you, Mark, very much for this enlightening and comprehensive and yet far too short presentation on such an important topic that really touches our lives in so many ways. And as you said, there's a structure to everything. You just have to recognize it. So as a reminder, the recording of this presentation will be available on the National Arts Club's YouTube channel tomorrow. And thank you all for your attendance and interest. Please follow the National Arts Club other programs and have a good afternoon.